Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Book More Show. It's Stuart here with Betsy Vaughan. Betsy, how's it going down there?
Fantastic. It is a gorgeous day here in Central Florida. So I'm going to get out and enjoy it a little bit. Yeah, so not hot. We're having some great weather. We can, as we refer to our boots and sweater weather. So take advantage of that, so not flip-flops and shorts. So gorgeous day here.
So I was just talking to Lucy before we jumped on the call here, and she's off heading into school. They've got an event there today, so she's also wearing boots and a sweater, but that's because it's about 35 degrees up there, not 75.
I was going to say, it might be 70 right now here. So.
My folks were visiting with my brother who's in Fort Lauderdale. He's a yacht broker across there, so they were across for the Fort Lauderdale boat show. So they just landed back this morning and called on the way back up as they're driving back up from London, where they flew into, saying that even within the first hour they're already struggling to reacclimatise back to the UK fall. So
I'm sure. I'm
definitely
sure. We've had some really great weather the last week or so, so just perfect temperature. So yeah, I'm sure. How's the weather there? Cold?
It is definitely very fally, so it's like mid 40s and not too many sunny days. But it's just the dark this time of year that I'm not a fan of. I don't think I actually diagnosed myself as having seasonal affective disorder, but definitely seasonal lack of contentment.
That happens to people. That when it's dark, it gets dark. I mean, in our household, we're sort of house divided. I like when it's dark earlier, and it's I'm okay with losing a few hours of the day, really
I think it's maybe even worse because I tend to stick on East Coast time, so I'm rarely up early UK time. So I then lose an extra couple of hours of daylight anyway because I'm asleep. So that kind of, I think, just compounds the problem this time of year. And then in the summer, you've got the other side of the problem where it gets light. It's kind of like 4 a.m. So it's not surprising for me to still be awake then. So it gets a little bit weird both sides.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
People will be thinking they've dialed into the Weather Channel.
Right.
We are today going to be talking about scorecard books. So just before we started recording, I don't think we've run through this topic at all before. I think we've occasionally mentioned them, but I don't think we've gone into detail on them yet on the show.
No, I don't think so.
So this time we're going to talk about, we're going to look at scorecards kind of in the context of lead conversion books. So a couple of shows ago, Dean was on, we were talking about 3 different types of books. So lead generating, lead conversing was the second one we mentioned. We've referred back to that a couple of times in the last few weeks, just for context. So going a bit deeper on that idea, scorecards, or the scorecard books that we do, are specifically can I talk about the 90-minute book product, or the 90-minute trip over the wrong word, the 90-minute book as being a service, because within the framework of completing something, that something varies quite widely depending on what people need to do. The scorecard book is then specifically a product, and that product came out of Strategic Coach. So we've got a lot of coach guys who are clients, and a lot of coach guys listen to this. So they'll be familiar, hopefully somewhat familiar with what I'm talking about, and will set the scene for those who aren't. But the scorecard framework was a coach tool originally, something that they teach to their members, encourage their members to create this thing called a scorecard, which allows people to position themselves or benchmark themselves on a continuum and identify opportunities for development. So I think most people listening to us now will have heard us talk about the Profit Activator scorecard, because that's one that's quite close to, there's a big crossover between what we talk about on the 90-minute book side of things, and then on the coaching side of the business, on the entrepreneur side of the business, that is Dean's other business. So the Profit Activator scorecard is the scorecard set up to reflect the 8 profit activators. And obviously we've talked about the 8 profit activators a lot. So between those two things, a coach crossover and the 8 profit activators, the Profit Activator scorecard crossover, hopefully people have got a lot of context. anyone that's listening to this for the first time and has got no context to it at all, then it's probably a good point now just to pause for a second and jump across to profitactivatorscore.com. And there's steps then to run through the 8 Profit Activators scorecard, and then jump back, and then hopefully the rest of the conversation will have more of a framework to tie it to. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So
let's get started.
We've had several coach clients come through the process and write a scorecard based book based on their scorecard. It's been quite interesting to see the guys who have kind of done all of that work already to create the scorecard and then really amplifying it with a book to support that process. But we've also had a couple of guys come through who have just heard us talking about scorecards separately, or heard Dean talking about scorecards separately, and then without the coach, without being directed by coach, have created them as well. So it's been quite a mix of people so far.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely an interest in it. From a coach standpoint, I guess there, how that seems to work. Some folks are very familiar with the scorecard, and then others don't. So I think it's certain groups within the group, if I'm not mistaken. So we have a lot of conversation. People like it. People like to use it. And when you really sit down and look at it, I happen to have one in front of me. Thomas Ruggies in front of me, for an example, just looking at his retirement scorecard. And it's really a simple way to assess the needs of the person that you're looking to deal with, or who you should be working with, why you should be working with someone. When it comes down to it, it's just a very simple process to work with. It's very straightforward. So
I think the thing that's nice about it from the author's point of view is it's really very, very straightforward to create, leveraging the work that's been done already. So we actually had this week just had a book outlining workshop that we did, and there was about 190 or so people had signed up for that, and the call went on for over 2 hours as we were running through things. And a lot of those issues or questions that were being raised is just the mental overhead, or the challenge of people thinking about the outline and what should best be in it and how they should structure it. So there's a lot of not ambiguity, but there's a lot of questions to answer, just thinking about creating a book without a very specific framework. And obviously that's one of the benefits of the 90-minute book process, because it overlays a framework onto the ideas that you've got in the first place. But the scorecard book takes it to the next level even further, because it's very constrained, but constrained in a good way. It's very much just leveraging work that's already been done. So it's super straightforward. And then for the customers who are reading it, so we talk about, let's just position it again slightly in it's a lead converting tool rather than a lead generating tool. Although, again, there's always crossover, but it's less about introducing someone to an idea brand new, less trying to get people to raise their hand as broadly interested in a subject. It's more the next stage down, the second step in the funnel of trying to educate and motivate them into taking that specific next step. So they already have identified what the problem is. They're already familiar with the concepts that you're presenting. And the scorecard then is a way of people kind of reinforcing for themselves, or kind of providing their own evidence that the next step that you're suggesting makes perfect sense, because they've just spent 15 minutes or so scoring themselves on a scorecard to really reinforce the point that they are weak in this particular area, or assistance or help in another particular area would lead to the outcome that they're looking for. So it's really beneficial on both sides, super easy to create, and very valuable from a customer's mindset of being given something of value, getting something from the process itself, and then being given a clear next step. So we're going to run through some details now to help people understand how it sets up. I'm going to use the 8 profit activators as the example, because I think more people are familiar with that. But then we probably won't have time. We're going to run out of time today. But in the in the next couple of shows that we do, we'll then start going through the author scorecard that we have for people who are looking to create a book for their business and generate more customers, get more leads. The author scorecard will then help you kind of measure your own progress in writing a book to fulfill that purpose. And obviously the outcome that we're trying to achieve is to identify, okay, you're strong here, you're weak here. This is really where we can step in and fill that gap. So typically what we see is people are obviously strong on their idea. They know what message they want to communicate, but the details, the kind of technical, the production side of it, the sitting it in a bigger funnel, all of those things are people tend to be weak on because it's not necessarily the first thing that springs to mind. So for this show, we'll use the 8 profit activators as the example. And the next couple of shows, we'll go through specifically the author scorecard. And then as you're listening to this, you get a lot of value on positioning yourself on those 8 mindsets within that to identify where the strengths and weaknesses are.
Okay, very good.
So the
all right.
8 profit activators, the breakthrough DNA book, that is the lead generating book. It's the book that sits at the top of the funnel. It introduces the concepts of the breakthrough DNA and the 8 profit activators. It goes through them step by step by step, each of the mindsets in turn, but it's really focused at introducing the concept. So lead generating book gets people to raise their hand at in the first contact, gives them a lot of benchmarking, background information, introduces the concepts. At the end of it, someone should have a pretty good understanding of separating their business into the before, during, and after unit. Those guys then are already on the list. We're communicating them through regular communications with the More Cheese Less Whiskers podcast, which is a weekly podcast. We then send out 2 other emails through the week that reinforces or highlights or brings out one of the points from a previous show. So all the time it's reinforcing this message. There's a super signature on each of the emails that gives people, here are 3 ways that we can help you get started right now. So at every point, we're offering something of value. We've introduced the concepts. We're reinforcing them through the regular email communication, and we're giving the people the opportunity to raise their hand and get started. On top of that, then we send other broadcast emails when we have events coming up or specific things that we're looking to do that we want people to opt into and raise their hand for. And the reason that I'm reinforcing this message again or reiterating this message is this is exactly what you should be thinking about in your business. I think we mentioned it last week that the book itself is, we did mention it last week because we were talking about the expo, the Small Business Expo, and so much of the time people think of the book as the product, and there's so much time and attention into creating this thing that it's easy to lose and forget and miss the bigger picture of where that sits in the funnel. So the book is really just the tool to get people onto the email list and create some rapport and some sense of reciprocity, give something of value, start the conversation. But the job of work in the book isn't to get book sales. The job of work is to get the conversation started. So all of those things build towards, in the 8 profit activators world, build towards having a understanding and a common language within all of the people who are on the list about what those 8 profit activators are, and an understanding that enhancing those or developing those is really going to move your business forward. So the scorecard book then, the Profit Activator Scorecard, then goes through each of those mindsets and the 4 stages associated with those mindsets and allows people to score themselves on where you are currently and where you want to be. The purpose of which is to identify where those gaps are. So when we look at the 8 profit activators, we kind of move from the before unit, which is really around lead generation, the during unit, which is about the delivery of the service, and the after unit, which is the lifetime relationships, the lifetime value of customers, and the orchestrating referrals. So very, very often what we see, in fact, the majority of submissions that we get back in through that route, is that people will identify themselves as scoring high in the during unit. They're very good at delivering the service that they deliver, but they're weak at the before and the after unit. So they're weak in terms of the lead generation at the front end and the orchestrating referrals and the lifetime connection at the back end. And that's really where we can offer a lot of value on that side of the business around the Breakthrough DNA live events and the coaching that we do and the email mastery series and the Breakthrough DNA, Breakthrough Blueprint Online. All of these programs are really designed to enhance those before and after unit elements. So the scorecard sits in the funnel at a stage where we've engaged with people at the first place. We've shared with them the concept so they can understand it. But this converting, this educating and motivating tool, this scorecard book, allows people to score for themselves. It's not we're telling them they're weak in a particular area. They can score them for themselves and identify where those weaknesses are. And then the call to action at the end of it is, okay, for the next step, you really should do this. And for the Profit Activator score particularly, it's really around the online program of Breakthrough DNA and then the live events. In terms of kind of context on where it sits, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Yes.
That's always the risk, isn't it? Because I mean, we're in this day in, day out, and this particular episode, right, I'm talking a lot about the Breakthrough DNA program, but really this exactly the same applies on the book side of the business because we use the exact same model. The 90-minute book, everything that we do in 90-minute books is really designed to enhance that kind of before unit, the identifying leads and that helping educate and motivate people to take the next step. And to a certain degree, the orchestrating referrals, because using books and referral strategy is powerful as well. So we're talking a lot about that model, but the same applies to the Breakthrough DNA. The same applies to the 90-minute book model. The same applies to Clay Anderson and the pilot scorecard that we've just been doing this week, and Tom Ruggie, as you were saying, the retirement scorecard, and Kim White with the life architect scorecard, and all of these frameworks, all of these scorecards that allow people to score themselves and kind of provide their own evidence that they're weak in particular areas and would benefit from more attention. That same model applies regardless of the business. And hopefully as we're talking through this and you're listening, then you can start to think about, okay, well, this particular model that I want to expand upon and draw people to in a book, there is then a next step of a scorecard to help people identify themselves and kind of provide their own evidence that some further work or some further support and help in this area is going to be of benefit.
Exactly. And I think it's so good to sort of have that. I always say things like, I need to check myself. And so I think this is just a definite way to, people will tell you always about their strengths, always, but we have a hard time identifying our weaknesses. And I think this is a good in your face kind of way to do it,
I think you can tell people that they should be doing something until you're blue in the face, but it's not quite the same as them in their own time with no pressure of someone looking over their shoulder, going through something where they evidence for themselves that they are weak in particular areas, and whether or not they choose to do anything about that, at least then they've taken the step to identify it.
But I think as far as, and we're pretty good, we have a pretty good healthy balance here of saying, like, when we have a concern or something, well, is this legit? Is this, and so I think if with me, and I think with you, if I really identified my weaknesses, it would nag at me to the point where I had to do something about it, So, I mean, I would truly be thinking about that on a regular basis. So it would definitely kick me in the hiney to get me to do something, I would say.
So the scorecard books that we've had come through so far, I think in part because, as I say, this is a coach tool, and certainly don't want to suggest that this is our idea that we came up with in the first place. This was fulfilling a need that had come to us by customers. So the coach setup, anyone that's interested in learning more about that, I'll stick a link in the show notes to some of the coach resources. And I think the majority of the audience are aware of strategic coach just because our groups cross over so much. But for anyone that's not, it really is the world's leading entrepreneurial development organization. So there's a lot more great information there. Coach naturally attracts, or the people that we see from Coach happen to be slightly skewed heavy in either the legal or financial services businesses. I think that's in part, there is a slight skewing Coach towards that group, and in part just though there's then the kind of crossover then of the people who want to write books tend to be it's just the way that it worked out. But the scorecard as a methodology, as a way of speaking to customers, is really can apply to whatever your business is. So I want to take a couple of minutes just to break down how a scorecard looks and what the approach should be when you're thinking about it. And again, strongly suggest heading across to Profit Activator Score to look at a real example, the Breakthrough DNA example. So it's built around 8 stages, and each stage is referred to as a mindset. So I'm not a Coach member, and Dean is. Obviously, that's where we created the Profit Activator Scorecard. A lot of people that come through to us to write scorecard-related books, although they're referred to as mindsets, they're not necessarily... it's not necessarily that they're looking for psychological tendencies or psychological traits. It's more the mindsets of, here's a way of thinking about something. So when we look at the Profit Activator Scorecard, it is the breakthrough, it is the 8 profit activators. So the first one, choose a single market, then compel people to raise their hands, educate and motivate. So it's not so much that it's an individual mindset of the person reading it. It's more a kind of a phrase or an element, a specific element to look at and measure. So referred to as mindsets a lot doesn't necessarily mean specifically that they have to be kind of psychological states of mind. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
So for each of the 8 mindsets, they then break it down into 4 stages. And of those 4 stages, or across those 4 stages, you can score from 1 to 12. So 1, 2, 3, you'd be scoring yourself within the first stage. 4, 5, 6, you'd be scoring yourself within the second stage. So you can see there the aim is to really get it a little bit more granular than just score yourself on 1 to 10. The other element of the scorecard is that it works best when they're not contradictory, where each mindset has kind of a linear development from beginning to end. So for example, I was talking to I think it was Clay a couple of weeks ago with the pilot scorecard, the pilot aptitude scorecard. So we were talking there, the initial ones that he had were you could really pick one of the 4 mindsets, and it wasn't necessarily on a line of weak to strong. It was just more 4 variations. So the example I gave him was, think about if you went to a restaurant and the mindset was for a particular type of food. So you could say on the mindset could be, what side dish do you want? And is it salad, fries, broccoli, or something else? In which case you could pick either one of those 4, but it's not necessarily that one is better than the other. It's just they're different from each other. Whereas if the mindset was, how do you want your steak cooked? Rare, medium rare, well done, burnt to a crisp. You can only pick one of those. It's not, one is kind of the exclusion of the other. It can't be both. Any of them are a preference or any of them are a development, but it's on a linear development. It's not just completely discretionary. So we see some people come through with mindsets that are a little bit more, in the first example, when you could select more than one of the options, that they're not particularly linear. It's just preference based. So the challenge of that is that as a customer, as the reader is kind of sitting and filling it in, if they're presented with too many things, well, it could be A or it could be B, then and both are equally valid, then it's a little bit difficult for you at the end of the process to say, well, you scored low here versus high here. Does that make sense? I was trying to get that across to a couple of weeks ago to say, think about starting with the end in mind. So what you want to finish up with is a scorecard where the person can clearly identify themselves as, yes, I meet this criteria of moving forward with you, or no, I don't meet the criteria of moving forward with you.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. It makes sense for sure.
So the only variation to bring into that, again, just something else to slightly think about, is the first example of what side dish do you want. The only time where it makes sense to do something like that is if you're only looking to identify people who order broccoli as a side dish. It's always a problem with analogies like this. Sometimes they break down once you try and drill a little bit deeper into them.
Right.
But usually the easiest way of thinking about it is on a linear scale. So what you want to do is have people evidence to themselves that they're weak on a number of things that you can help with. That's the easiest way of thinking about it. The preference-based one of, do you want salad or fries or home fries or broccoli? If it's a situation where you're looking to just identify the people who like broccoli, then it is possible that that example kind of works. I can't yet think of an example of where that works particularly well in a scorecard kind of way, because it's not quite as neat as it being on a scale and you just identifying yourself as weak. It's almost turns into a little bit of, what's the best way of describing it? It's almost as if it's a little bit more whiskery and kind of self-determining. Imagine you've got 8 mindsets that are very preferential, and really you're just trying to say to people, well, if you've chosen these 8 preferences, then obviously you need to work with me. It's not quite as, it feels a little bit more contrived than if people were just scoring themselves where they could score themselves high or low, and if they happen to score low, then the suggestion is it will be the most use for them to work with you. Does that make sense, that difference? That
makes sense. Yeah.
I was
following you. Yes, definitely makes sense for sure.
If anyone's listening to this and that they're kind of not getting that and they've got a real strong question about it, it's a thought that I haven't quite got the right model to communicate it. So if anyone's got any questions, just shoot us a message to support at 90 Minute Books, or leave a comment on this this episode, which is going to be the show notes, as always, at 90minutebooks.com/podcast. And this is episode 45045. Leave a comment and we'll try and manage those through. So jumping back then to the scorecard. So 8 mindsets and 4 stages, and people can score themselves on 1 to 12. At the end of the process, once they've gone through and answered each of the questions, they'll have a score for each of the mindsets that should quite clearly identify where the weaknesses are. Particularly, I think, if you can kind of group them together. So again, this is why the 8 Profit Activators one, the Profit Activator score, is a great example, because not only are they developing kind of from a low score to a high score, they also develop almost chronologically from mindset 1 through mindset 8, because it follows the before, during and after unit model. So it's very easy for people to say, okay, well, I'm weak in the before unit, I'm strong in the during unit, I'm weak in the after unit. Having that framework where someone can kind of just at the end of the process be sat there with your scorecard book in hand, they've read through each of the mindsets that you've described, they've been described in a way that makes sense, so they can easily score themselves on each individual mindset. And then at the end of it, they've got then a collected, they've got the results on one page in front of them where they can clearly identify where the weakness is and where the strength is. Then that in the process, that in the funnel that you're trying to create, you've then got a very strong way of saying, okay, at the end of the process, you've now sat with a score. You've got your current score. You've potentially got a desired score. So you're looking at where you are now and where you want to be. What we typically find is people score themselves in one of 3 ways. They'll either be weak across the board, in which case it may be the situation that you haven't really thought about this concept before. So let's switch into say one of the financial advisor books, so a book about 401ks and retirement planning. So as you run through your score, it might be that you're weak across the board, in which case retirement planning isn't something that you've really thought about before. The best next step is to head over to the website, and we've got 3 videos talking about the introduction to 401k planning. And we run through the basics. We kind of demystify some of the language, but really that's a great place for you to score. What most people score is low in certain areas and high in other areas. So the way that we've structured the scorecard, we talk about your ability to save in the first place, your ability to determine how much you need in the middle, so the kind of what target you're going for, and then your understanding or knowledge of what happens when you come to retire, so how you take that money out at the end. So what we typically find is people will score high at on one of those particular areas and low at the others. So depending on which one of those apply to you, then again, head over to the website and potentially fill out the savers budget plan, or the withdrawal. We've got a withdrawal top 10 withdrawal fund opportunities. Like in the UK, we'd call them annuity providers. It's the kind of insurance product that gives you the money. Whichever one you're low on, head across and do this extra thing. The third scenario might be people score high across the board, in which case you're probably a relatively savvy investor. This is something you've focused on for a long time. What you would benefit from the most is from talking to one of our partners about ways to optimize and leverage the scheme even further, in which case either fill out this assessment or send me an email and we can take it from there. So starting with the end in mind, as with all of the books that we talk about, what you're really looking at doing is creating something that gets them to that minimum viable commitment next step, that next thing in the sequence that you would ideally like them to do. So building the scorecard back from those results, knowing that you want to give them a framework that's easy for them and doesn't feel like someone sat over their shoulder or judging them or kind of leading them down an alley, giving them something that they can complete so they can score themselves. But then once they have scored themselves, giving them the sensible next steps based on where they've been. That's really where the value comes in, the magic comes in of creating that book as a conversion tool, because not only have they just spent 15 minutes proving to themselves that they're weak in this particular area, but you've given them the very convenient, useful, valuable, minimum viable commitment next step to take the conversation further and get that one step closer, or even pulling the trigger and actually working with you and getting the outcome that they're looking for.
Yeah. All right.
That was a long...
It was a lot. It was.
Yeah, that was a lot.
I was following along, but I was thinking, we have a lot of resources people can go to sort of, if there's any confusion about it, they can go to the profitaccelerator.com and they can do breakthrough-dna.com. They can kind of look at it or just shoot us an email. So it is a lot, but it's broken down a few places very simply, I think, for people to be able to get on. Yeah,
hopefully if so we're kind of just drawing up on time now. So in the next, I think next week we're going to be chatting with Dean again, and then we've got a good call with one of the authors the following week. So a couple of weeks down, I'll catch up again, and then we'll start going through the author scorecard, because anyone that's sat listening and thinking about creating a book, then the author scorecard in and of itself is a super valuable tool to kind of position where you are against our 8 mindsets of creating the best possible tool to generate more business. So we'll start running through each of those mindsets, and that'll give people another kind of touch point to the scorecard as a process. But I think 2 things to leave people with then. Head over to profitactivatorscore.com to see the example of the Breakthrough DNA, the 8 Profit Activators scorecard, because then this conversation, in fact, I'd go across there and grab a copy of it and print it off. And as we're talking through these things, kind of use that to run against what we're saying. And then the second thing I'd say, particularly for any coach guys that are listening, or anyone that's thought about this scorecard type approach of allowing people to evidence for themselves that they need some support. Anyone that's struggling with that, we've done a lot of these now, and they're proven to be super valuable for people. So if you want to shoot us a message to, either shoot me a message directly if you want to Stuart at 90minutebooks.com, or just shoot a message through to support at 90minutebooks.com, and we'll get both of those. Ask any questions about the scorecards. We can give you some examples and run through, and more than happy to jump on a call for 15 minutes and kind of dial in your particular scorecard to how it can best serve your funnel, whether you are a financial advisor or running a pilot school or a life coach, or however many of the other types of businesses that we've helped create scorecards for.
Awesome. Great idea there.
Perfect. Okay, guys. Well, hopefully that was valuable. Head over to get the show notes, 90minutebooks.com/podcast, and this is episode 045. And there'll be links to some of the things we've talked about. And then, as I say, a couple of weeks until you and I are back, Betsy, but then we'll start running through the author scorecard, and that's going to be very valuable for anyone that's sat there thinking about creating a book but is maybe struggling in one of the areas. The site isn't live yet, but if anyone wants to get a bit of a head start in the next couple of weeks, authorscorecard.com is going to be live with this scorecard. So a bit of a secret access there for anyone listening. We're just coming up to, we're recording now on the 18th, so week before Thanksgiving. So we'll have a bit of time over then to get that project finished, and I guess we're not going to speak to people until after that. So everyone listening, have a great Thanksgiving. Hope you get some time to relax. Betsy, same goes for you, and
yes,
we'll speak again in the next one.
Very good. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Bye.